and I Glorify is the third full-length album from northeastern France-based death metal band Athanatheos. And this is not so much a concept album as it is part of a larger, I think, 5-part concept that has kind of overtaken the focus of the band from the start, as far as I know. And this is a group that formed between a fellow named Samuel Gerard, who definitely came up in the era of bands like Morbid Angel and Immolation, and that's always kind of informed the rhythmic movement that he writes with, as well as the sort of ambitious concepts that he puts into his work in terms of illustrating the ills of religion, in this case specifically Christianity, and the history of Christianity in an interesting way. So what this album in particular, which is, it's technically kind of the third chapter, or the maybe the maybe the fourth, I guess the third makes sense here, where they've gone through the history of the Christian religion, its causes, formations, and various, well, anyway, this album introduces really the key point where Rome had essentially fallen, or fallen apart in terms of its direct rule, and basically focuses on what generally this section of this period is seen as the first 7 ecumenical councils. And I won't get into the history of all that because I don't know enough about it. I think that the fact is that this band intends to match the kind of the epic themes of a ancient age where the thought and the cult of Christianity was affecting the world in powerful ways, and this makes for a chance to write death metal that is, it's surely an underground death metal experience for people who are interested in the early 2000s sort of building blocks, but also, well, let's get into a song first, and you'll see kind of where I'm going with this. The light of reason for myself. So there's this interesting medium between the idea that brutal death metal introduced a new language, a new rhythmic language, and blackened death metal introduced a new rhythmic language to death metal. And how do you square up those two forces without creating progressive music when you're making a concept album or 5? I think the proper medium has been found in this band for a long time, where, you know, you wouldn't necessarily compare their work to like Hate Eternal or Mithras, but it is verging on kind of a unique performative style that works. It's working a unique, elaborate vocalization and cadence into what is very sort of stiff-necked classic death metal traits. And for a lot of people that will feel confined or maybe overwritten in a lot of ways. And you'll certainly feel that on this record in terms of how verbose it is. There's a lot of lyrics to cover. These are full to half-page lyrics for each song here. And I think that ambition kind of outweighs the need for a predictable death metal song. And in many ways, this record excels because its pieces aren't predictable. And they've done their best to sort of work that narrative element into their compositions. And I think they did a really good job early on with sort of the war-torn feeling of their first album, Alpha Theistic, which is a very underrated release for its time. You know, I could see why it was not noticed. It was self-released and whatnot. But as an extension of their second full-length, Prophetic Era, or How Yahweh Became the One, we find that this third record expands that vocabulary in an appropriate way. You know, these are Roman times. These are sort of epics without being quite long in length. And for the sake of a better description, there are more clean vocals that are related to sort of Gregorian chants, and that's sort of a placeholder for just harmonized or group sung parts, chorales, and it gives it sort of almost a Greek tragedian play reading when you're more invested in the narrative of the story and you're following along with the lyrics. And I think that's the main point to make here, is that this is a band that demands that you kind of follow along in the way that they intend you to experience this record. I think it's going to be a hard thing for a lot of people to be kind of forced to pick up the lyric sheet and follow along with the story they're telling, because it really is a big part of what they're doing. You should know what the guy is singing because he is growling so much. So it's an extra level of involvement that I love, because I think death metal can come with like a reading list, or a stack of books to check out if you like what they have to say. And in this case, they give you the book. They give you a lot to work with in terms of this concept where 3 generations of a family are communicating the change in Rome over the course of 70 years. And it's something I could really appreciate, spending time with. It sort of justified the extensive listening I was going to give it for review anyway. But it sort of, it does, it makes it so this isn't quite a riff record, but there are riffs. It isn't quite a standard death metal album, but it is very traditional, a lot of sense. I think if you like the more elaborate voicing of the riffs on Kronos' first 2 records, maybe more of a brutal band for some, early Cataclysm, or even Anata, you'll appreciate the sort of Morbid Angel-infused sense of scope, as well as the more angular, maybe slightly dissonant touches that come into sort of the Blackened and the Immolation-esque that shows up here. That's kind of the best way to sum it up. I think there's a lot more to this record that one could get into. I think that I didn't touch upon sort of the Blackened guitar voicings very much, and how that relates to the French death metal sort of point of view in general beyond the late 90s. And, just the way that death metal evolved within the 2000s. So it's a lot to sum up. It's kind of a big album. It's not necessarily a very long album either. So it's very dense and a little bit unapproachable in some ways. The production is a little bit stiff. The drum performances are very prescribed and demanding, to the point where this is for someone who really wants to focus on a death metal record, who really wants to read all the lyrics and wants to know what the band has to say. It comes across pretty clear when you have the lyric sheet in front of you. But I found it to be a very impressive record overall, and one that I could recommend to a high degree. I was fortunate enough to premiere it last week, and of course I think highly of it, just regardless. Again, it's a challenging record. It does have a big ask up front, but once you invest into this record, I think that it'll make you want to go back and listen to the first 2, which are of the same standard. They have some different production ticks and maybe some different musicians involved, but overall, this band has been quality from the start, and I love how they're able to make this ambition work on their own terms. A lot of this is self-recorded or self-produced, and the result is pretty fine, despite taking on so much. So it's a high recommendation for me. There's quite a long review that goes over the particulars of the concept and the way I see it as well. So check out the written review and check out the album.
He observed the same face.